Good morning. My name is Dr. Nana Kwamina, and I am the Director of the Environmental Assessment Division here at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or CNSC. On behalf of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, we would like to thank you for joining us today for this webinar, which will cover the CNSC's regulatory review process, as well as provide updates on Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, or CNL's proposed Near-Surface Disposal Facility, or NSDF, nuclear power demonstration closure projects. The goal of today's webinar is to inform our participants of the CNL, NSDF, and NPD projects' environmental assessment and licensing regulatory review processes, and to provide project statuses updates where we are presently. We'll first begin by introducing ourselves. I have already introduced myself as the moderator of the session, but for those that may have missed it, my name is Dr. Nana Kwamina, and I am the Director of the Environmental Assessment Division at the CNSC. I am joined by two colleagues, Nicole Frigo, Environmental Assessment Specialist with the Environmental Assessment Division, and Kevin Ross, Senior Project Officer with the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories Regulatory Program Division. The purpose of this webinar is to provide a brief overview of the CNSC, describe the ongoing environmental assessments for the NSDF and NPD projects, describe the ongoing licensing reviews for the NSDF and NPD projects, provide project-specific updates, and outline next steps going forward. We would like to begin our presentation with a note about the current COVID-19 pandemic. The CNSC continues to monitor nuclear facilities to ensure that the public and the environment are protected. However, the pandemic has impacted some of the CNSC's activities. For example, in-person outreach activities have been temporarily halted, and Indigenous consultations and engagement are being conducted through virtual meetings. Acting as an independent quasi-judicial tribunal and court of record, the commission consists of up to 7 members who are appointed by the Governor and Council under the authority of the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. 1 member is designated as President of the Commission and Chief Executive Officer of the CNSC. The Commission is the CNSC's decision-making body and makes licensing decisions, including those for all major nuclear facilities in Canada. The CNSC reports to Parliament through the Minister of Natural Resources on the Commission's activities under the Act. Neither the Minister nor the Governor and Council has a role in CNSC's decision-making or power of appeal. CNSC's decisions are reviewable only by the Federal Court of Canada. The CNSC's regulatory framework consists of laws passed by Parliament that govern the regulation of Canada's nuclear industry and regulations, licenses, and documents that the CNSC uses to regulate the nuclear industry. The CNSC's commission makes decisions after considering all evidence presented from interveners, from license applicants, and from staff. The CNSC is Canada's nuclear regulator. Under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, or the NSCA, the CNSC regulates all nuclear facilities and activities in Canada and sets out regulatory requirements and expectations for their safe use. Specifically, the CNSC is mandated to regulate the use of nuclear energy and materials to protect health, safety, and security in the environment, implement Canada's international commitments on the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and disseminate objective scientific, technical, and regulatory information to the public. The CNSC regulates all nuclear activities in Canada, which include all phases of the nuclear fuel cycle, from uranium mining, milling and processing, operation of nuclear reactors, and management of radioactive waste. The regulation of other nuclear technologies such as nuclear medicine, nuclear research, industrial uses, and dosimetry services also fall under the mandate of the CNSC. I will now turn the presentation over to Nicole Frigo.
The Commission is supported by scientific, technical, and professional staff referred to as CNSC staff. CNSC staff are highly skilled professionals who are committed to safeguarding the health, safety, and security of Canadians and the environment. This diverse staff is made up of scientists, engineers, corporate professionals, new graduates, students, and alumni. It is CNSC staff that carry out day-to-day work of the CNSC. This includes undertaking regulatory reviews and technical assessments, presenting assessments and findings to the Commission for decision, developing the CNSC's regulatory framework, which includes regulatory documents and guidance, reviewing submissions and applications according to regulatory requirements, verifying licensee compliance with regulatory requirements through desktop reviews and inspections, and if necessary, taking enforcement actions in accordance with the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, its regulations, and any applicable licenses. The CNSC is responsible for setting appropriate requirements, verifying compliance with those requirements, and making objective, independent, and science-based decisions. The CNSC uses a risk-informed regulatory approach to plan and carry out licensing and compliance activities in order to establish appropriate regulatory control that is commensurate with the activities and risk involved. The CNSC's rigorous, multifaceted regulatory oversight, which includes on-site inspections, desktop reviews, and annual oversight reports discussed in public meetings, ensures that licensees are operating safely and adhering to their license conditions. When a licensee does not comply with the regulations or license conditions, CNSC staff determine the appropriate enforcement action to be taken. Consistent with international principle of nuclear regulation and operation, licensees are responsible for the safe operation of their facilities. This responsibility cannot be delegated or passed on to any other party. In Canada, this means that licensees are responsible to manage their operations to ensure the continued protection of health, safety, security, and the environment. In all cases, licensees remain responsible for the safe use of nuclear substances and prescribed equipment, as well as the implementation of their operations programs, all of which are reviewed by CNSC staff to ensure they remain effective and up to date with regulatory requirements. Environmental reviews are central to CNSC's responsibilities. Environmental effects of all nuclear facilities or activities are assessed at every phase of their life cycle. There are different possible types of environmental reviews based on which laws and regulations apply to each project. Early in the process, CNSC staff determine which type of environmental review applies by reviewing the information provided by the applicant or licensee in their application and supporting documentation. New federal legislation, the Impact Assessment Act, came into force in August 2019. Projects with environmental assessments initiated under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012, referred to as CIA 2012 from now, that are led by the CNSC, will continue under their current processes. The Impact Assessment Act contains provisions to enable these projects to advance in this way. We'll be discussing some of these projects in more detail later on. In all cases, the CNSC ensures that the public has an opportunity to participate in environmental reviews, and Indigenous consultation and engagement activities are integrated in the review process to the extent possible. Federal and provincial agencies are involved and contribute their expertise in impact assessments and environmental assessments. Decisions are independent, transparent, and evidence-based. This slide shows at a high level the different steps of environmental assessment under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012. Indigenous consultation and engagement occur throughout the project's assessment. Both the NPD and NSDF projects are currently in step 3 of the process. I will now turn the presentation over to Kevin Ross to discuss the CNSC's licensing process.
Under the Nuclear Safety Control Act and its regulations, the CNSC staff undertake a thorough licensing assessment of the application. The process is illustrated here. CNSC staff assess the license submissions and scrutinize the technical documents and safety assessments against the regulatory requirements of the Nuclear Safety Control Act and its associated regulations, as well as CNSC regulatory and guidance documents, CSA standards, and IAEA requirements and guidance. This is captured in the environmental review and technical assessment boxes in the figure. Licensee submissions, including technical documentation, undergo multiple rounds of review throughout the iterative process by CNSC staff to ensure adequate supporting documents are provided, regulatory requirements and staff expectations are fulfilled, and international and industry best practices are followed, and the information provided is sufficient to ensure work will be done safely by the licensee if the Commission approves the application. CNSC staff also determine whether the applicant is qualified and has made adequate provisions for the protection of health and safety of people and the environment. Applicants must also demonstrate the required measures to maintain national security and implement Canada's international obligations for the peaceful use of nuclear energy. Following this review, there's a public hearing where the Commission hears from CNSC staff, the licensee, and members of the public. Considering all the evidence presented to them, the Commission makes a decision. If the Commission decides the license application will be approved, CNSC staff then undertake compliance verification and performance monitoring against the license. I should highlight as well that throughout the licensing process and all facility life cycle stages, environmental monitoring and Indigenous and public involvement are ongoing. CNSC technical assessments are anchored in a framework of 14 technical areas, otherwise known as safety and control areas, or SCAs, and other matters of regulatory interest. The SCA framework is designed to allow CNSC staff to evaluate all applications consistently and provide a platform to ensure that all aspects relevant to safety and security are thoroughly reviewed using a risk-informed approach. The conduct of technical assessment process provides guidance on how to effectively and consistently prepare for conducting a technical assessment, complete sufficiency checks of the information provided according to applicable criteria, and provide technical conclusions and recommendations to support making regulatory recommendations. Technical assessments are integral to the regulatory assessment process, and as such, represent a major component of the core work conducted daily by CNSC staff. The results of each technical assessment are the technical conclusions and recommendations that are considered in conjunction with other regulatory information to make overall regulatory recommendations. Applicable codes and standards are included in the facility TARM, or Technical Assessment Review Matrix. TARMs for NSDF and MPD were prepared by CNSC staff and shared with the licensee. The NSDF and MPD TARMs cover all national and international standards that are applicable to the applicant's submissions and which the applicant submissions are reviewed against. The TARM is a tool used to support staff in carrying out technical assessments. It provides information on review topics and technical assessment criteria by regulated facility. The TARM provides a set of criteria that can be used to assess a licensee's proposed safety and control measures. CNSC verifies the adequacy of the design, construction, commissioning, operation, and decommissioning and closure of a facility against the respective TARMs. I'll now turn the presentation back to Nicole to discuss the near surface disposal facility project.
Thanks, Kevin. In May 2016, CNL made its initial regulatory application for the near surface disposal facility project to launch the environmental assessment process. In March 2017, CNL submitted a license application to construct the NSDF. The near surface disposal facility is an engineered facility for the disposal of low-level radioactive waste at the Chalk River Laboratories site in Deep River. Under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, CNL's proposal requires approval by the CNSC and involves an amendment to the Chalk River's Nuclear Research and Test Establishment Operating License. Before the CNSC can make a licensing decision on the proposal, an EA decision affirming that the proposed activities will not cause significant adverse environmental effects is required. The project is currently undergoing an environmental assessment under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, or CIA 2012, and a licensing regulatory review under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act and its regulations. The project would include an engineered mound, a wastewater treatment plant, supporting facilities, and site infrastructure. Waste to be disposed of at the NSDF shall meet the waste acceptance criteria established to assure compliance with operational and long-term safety requirements of the disposal facility. This slide shows a timeline of the project review to date, showing where the environmental assessment milestones have been complete and those that will take place over the next year. As shown on this timeline, CNSC is currently awaiting CNL submission of the final impact statement and licensing documentation. Next slide. As mentioned, the project has been undergoing an environmental assessment since May 2016. For brevity, I will focus on the regulatory activities that have taken place over the past year and a half. In late December 2019, CNL submitted revised documentation for its environmental impact statement, or EIS, to the CNSC, consisting of a revised EIS, updated technical supporting documents, and responses to all federal provincial comments and information requests. The federal and provincial review team completed a 90-day technical review, which ended in March 2020. The technical review resulted in information requests and comments which were provided to CNL in April 2020. Since then, CNL has provided responses and held multiple technical meetings with federal and provincial review team to ensure that they have adequately responded to the review team's comments. In October 2020, the federal and provincial review team determined that CNL had responded to all information requests. Once the CNSC reviews the final EIS and considers it to be complete, an environmental assessment report under CIA 2012 will be drafted and made available for review by Indigenous groups and the public prior to a public commission hearing. The project is undergoing licensing regulatory review, technical assessments, and iterative process since March 31st, 2017, which was the license application date. CNSC and CNL staff arranged and have held several technical theme meetings to discuss staff review, concerns and comments, and expectations since the receipt of the license application. CNL has responded to hundreds of CNSC's comments from the technical assessments. Reviews are ongoing of revised documents and CNL's responses to CNSC comments, such as, but not limited to, critical safety, safety analysis report, post-closure safety assessment, inventory and waste acceptance criteria, safety cases, and the list goes on. The next steps include licensing commission member document and CIA report, which will be drafted by the CNSC, a date to be confirmed for the hearing. A two-part public hearing with oral and written interventions is proposed. Comment period for the public and Indigenous people on CNSC documents. Commission to render the EA and licensing decisions following the public hearings. And all of these dates to be determined once the commission sets public hearing dates. I'll now turn the presentation back to Kevin to provide information on the NPD closure project.
In 2016, CNL submitted a request to the CNSC to permit in situ decommissioning of the Nuclear Power Demonstration Waste Facility, a former nuclear generating station that operated until 1987. Under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, CNL's proposal requires an amendment to the existing NPD waste facility license issued by the CNSC. Similar to the NSDF project, before the CNSC can make a licensing decision on the proposal, an EA decision affirming that the proposed activities will not cause significant adverse environmental effects is also required. Therefore, this project is currently undergoing both an environmental assessment under CIA 2012 and a licensing regulatory review under the NSCA and its regulations. This slide shows a timeline of the proposed review to date, showing where EA milestones have been complete and those that will take place over the next year. As shown in this timeline, CNSC is currently awaiting CNL's submission of additional and revised documentation to resume the technical review of the draft environmental impact statement. CNL submitted a draft environmental impact statement, which was released for public comment from November 2017 until February 2018. On March 31st, 2020, CNL submitted revised EIS and licensing documentation to the CNSC. The revised EIS submissions were deemed incomplete on May 5th, 2020. CNL is revising their submission and is expected to resubmit in the coming weeks. Upon submission of the revised EIS package, CNSC staff will conduct another completeness review. If the package is deemed complete, a 90-day technical review of the EIS by the federal and provincial review team will start. CNL will be expected to address any comments or information requests that arise from the review team's technical review. If the project satisfies the requirements of the EA and technical assessment, and the CNSC is satisfied that the safety case meets requirements, the CNSC will proceed with the subsequent steps of the regulatory process. As mentioned, CNL applied for a license amendment to proceed with in-situ decommissioning for the MPD waste facility in 2016. Since then, CNSC staff have undertaken a detailed, iterative technical review of the information submitted by CNL in support of the amendment application. These reviews have included key technical documents, such as the post-closure safety assessment, the groundwater models, the flushing model, waste form, and waste inventory. Due to CNSC staff comments, CNL has submitted several revisions of these documents throughout the review process, and there have been several detailed theme meetings to discuss CNSC review comments and concerns and expectations. Currently, the licensing review is continuing, and CNL is responding to CNSC staff comments on several documents. This review will continue until staff are satisfied that CNL has addressed all concerns and meets the relevant regulatory requirements, at which time we will proceed to the hearing preparation phase. I will now return the presentation to Dr. Quanamena.
CNSC staff want to continue building long-term positive and trusted relationships with Indigenous peoples in Canada. As an agent of the Crown, CNSC consults with potentially impacted Indigenous peoples to understand and address potential impacts to Indigenous and/or treaty rights from a project. CNSC leads a whole-of-government approach to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of engagement and consultation processes. CNSC requires licensees to engage with potentially affected Indigenous peoples early in the development and throughout the life of their project. CNSC has recently updated its public engagement strategy for the NSDF and MPD projects in an effort to enhance engagement as these projects are approaching the remaining steps in the regulatory process. CNSC's updated approach to public engagement includes increased transparency on staff's technical review process, as well as several new engagement tools to be used, including regular and consistent status updates through project bulletins or newsletters, topical discussions with two-way dialogue, such as online webinars and one-on-one sessions, and contextualizing the project through video and/or written frequently asked questions. We welcome your thoughts and views on these proposed approaches and any other ideas you may have to improve our public engagement on these projects. This webinar is the first in what we hope are a series of webinars for these projects. This slide lists some suggested topics for future webinars. We are, of course, open to other proposals for suggested topics and encourage you to provide them as part of your feedback for this session. Thank you all for attending this webinar on the NSDF and NPD projects.